starts glowing and the film starts rolling. You wanna be knowing what you might be in for. So give the show a listen and find out what you're missing. Put yourself in position for the ears you can score.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Goods. This is episode 184. It's the first episode that we're sitting down to record in October, which, of course, is our spooky season, as it is for many others. So I wanted to start something kind of new, make sure that we're talking spooky movies in October. But I also wanted to carry on the tradition where, in these last few episodes, we have had guests join us on the pod. And so this time I brought a guest. And so welcome to the podcast, Lindsey. Are you out there?
Hello. Thank you for having me.
And of course, Dan is here too.
Hey, Brian. Hey, Lindsey. It's great to meet you. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm excited.
So Lindsey is part of the same film graduate degree program that I'm currently pursuing. We're both third-year MFA students. And she was the director of photography and also my assistant director on the last film I directed, which was a short proof of concept version of the film I'm currently in the process of expanding to be my thesis project, which Lindsey will also be working on. And so I brought to the table two movies which were very inspirational. The film that I'm working on for my capstone, that's what we call the thesis, is titled The Lobsters at Beach Party Point. And it's kind of a fusion of the Beach Party series that we covered a while back on the podcast with specifically these movies that we're talking about today, which are Teenagers from Outer Space from 1959 and The Lost Skeleton of Cadavra from 2001. So did you all get a chance to watch both of these?
Sure did.
Yeah, I had never seen either of these, but I did indeed watch them.
And Teenagers from Outer Space is public domain, directed by Tom Graff. Lost Skeleton of Cadavra was directed by indie filmmaker Larry Blaymeyer. And where'd you find that one?
I watched both of them on Tubi.
The People's Streamer. I downloaded the public domain version of the Teenagers one. It's one of my, I know I bring it up when we do public domain movies. I love that you can just pull up the movie on Wikipedia if it's public domain, and it's just like, oh yeah, here's the director, here's the info. Also, you can just hit this button right here and watch the whole feature-length film. It's like right there for you in Wikipedia. I found somewhere else to download it, and I just watched it from the free sourced version online. But I did watch The Lost Skeleton of Cadavra on Tubi as well.
Tubi is so clutch. I wasn't sure you'd find it as easily as all that, but I'm glad that we could. I, of course, have a DVD from back in the day. Had to track this thing down.
Brian, where do you stand on the, I'm trying to think of the right way to put it. I don't want to say snobby, but like the wave of people who push really hard that, like, to be a real movie enthusiast, you need to be a physical media collector.
I think it is worthwhile to maintain physical copies, because otherwise you're at the mercy of the people who run the streaming services or what have you. However they're distributing it digitally, they can take it away, they can censor it. I mean, it can get into really Orwellian territory. Don't you know that in Splash they covered up Daryl Hannah's butt? Only the people who have the DVD are going to see that from now on.
And we're all worse off for it, right, Brian?
Exactly.
Lindsey, are you much of a physical media collector?
No, I have some public PBS DVDs from one of my professors. That's about it. But I totally hear what you're saying, Brian, about collecting the media that's important to you. I just haven't gotten around to it, I guess. I guess I would collect like the DVD collection of Breaking Bad or like other shows like that I like.
Oh, I see why Brian invited you on.
Dan gets really frustrated that I bring up Breaking Bad in most episodes. Yeah.
In every episode.
I wouldn't say I get frustrated. I'd say it's gotten to the point of like absurdity. It's like you find something that's totally innocuous and unrelated. You know what this is like? This is actually like Breaking Bad. It's like someone's eating soup. Oh, you know what this makes you think of? One time in Breaking Bad, someone ate soup or something.
Dan hasn't watched it. Not much, anyway.
Well, then you can't judge about it then.
No, you're right. I know. I guess I need to.
Yeah. Well, I won't go off on a tangent about why I love Breaking Bad so much, but it was like better than I expected it to be when I tuned in, and then I was hooked. And it's kind of a unique genre flavor. It's like gangster, but dark comedy, Southwestern flavor. Good show. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about why I like these movies and was drawn to these movies and feel a connection to these movies. So, Teenagers from Outer Space, I came across this one on the PlayStation 2 game, speaking of physical copies of media, Destroy All Humans, which is kind of like a Grand Theft Auto game, but you play as a space alien with telekinesis. And so, like, as you're running around stealing DNA and probing people, they are, like, the humans are cottoning onto your presence. And so then you've got this raising alert level, and it's like you're dealing with the cops, and then the army comes, and then the men in black come. And it's all in tribute to the 50s alien invasion films, like Plan 9 from Outer Space, which we've previously talked. And when you beat the game, it unlocks Teenagers from Outer Space and says, you can now watch this movie, which I had never heard of.
You watch the movie inside the video game?
Inside the video game, yes.
Strange.
And so, like, my friend was there and we beat the game, and we're like, well, I guess we gotta watch this movie now. And I didn't expect what we got.
So did it just like play it full frame, or is it like you're looking at a in video game TV and you see the movie there? So
I think it filled the whole frame. There is a level that has a drive-in movie theater in the level, and the drive-in movie theater is showing Plan 9 from Outer Space. And so you can see, like, part of Plan 9 on the screen in the theater if you go over there. But no, I think it played it pretty normally. You know, you've got the DVD player built into the PS2, so pretty typical movie watching experience, other than it happened to come at the end of a video game. I think it makes sense to talk through this one first. So, Teenagers from Outer Space. First impressions before we're recapping plots. What'd you think when you popped this one on?
So we've brought a handful of movies to the pod, and I say we have, but it's really been you, Brian, that would be classified by some viewers as so bad it's good. And I would say this is kind of in that realm. It's like the epitome, the quintessence of 50s sci-fi Z-grade schlock. It's just like, it's not, maybe Z-grade is a little too harsh. It's not like aggressively bad and cheap. There's a couple of effects that maybe raise the eyebrows, but like, honestly, it's not the worst out of them, but we can maybe talk through that a little bit. But when you think of like a cheesy 50s sci-fi movie, a lot of what you're thinking of is here in Teenagers from Outer Space.
Yeah, I thought it was hilarious. I enjoyed it a lot. Just the acting, first of all, and just the lines, the way they're written, and the way people kind of say extra things that are irrelevant in every line was really funny to me.
And could you kind of see the story parallels that I
was
rampantly?
It was basically exactly what I was expecting based on knowing you and knowing your project.
Right. So, Lobsters at Beach Party Point, just to give a little bit more information about the project as it stands. Like I said, influenced by the 60s beach party films, influenced by the 50s alien invasion films, especially this one in particular, which is public domain. I'm free to pick and choose the plot points. It's also got some nods to some other franchises we've talked, specifically like Zombies, where it's like the feuding groups, the cross tracks romance between the feuding families, and like leaning into the color scheme, make everything colorful.
Wait, was it not black and white?
My film is, as we shot it so far, was not black and white.
Oh, sorry. You were going back and forth between the teenagers one and your movie. I see. Okay, so you're saying your movie is colorful and pulled from teenagers from outer space. I see.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm kind of jumping around. I just wanted to lay out a little bit about why we've gathered here today, and it's to kind of delve. I found that I attached to in these films that has led to the film that is currently in the works. Also quite a bit of the sort of Avatar, Ferngully, Pocahontas thing, where you've got the kind of invader finds a love interest among the native population and then ends up siding against their original group and has to find like a peaceful solution to that.
Although Derek, like, I'm sure we're going to get into it more, but Derek doesn't seem like he was ever really on the side of his people. Immediately when they land, he's getting mad and saying, foreign beings are not of your concern, Thor, because you're an asshole. So he doesn't really have to be persuaded very much to join Earth.
Yep. So the last couple days I've been revisiting these movies to kind of like make sure that my script is like narratively compelling, and I think as it stands it pretty much just matches what we get here, which is maybe not the most stellar screenwriting, but like my advisor, who's like the big deal screenwriting teacher, is like, no, you need to have theme, you need to have the message. It's like, what do you feel? What are you trying to say? It's like, I kind of just want to see space aliens.
Yes, that's the whole point. And a lot of this stylistic choices of, I mean, I don't know if it was on purpose back then or not, but the extra dialogue and stuff, they're saying you need to trim that, Brian. Like, this is unnecessary. The scene is slow, but that's kind of the point.
I think the real theme is you get what you ask for if you name your alien Derek. If you have an alien child and you name him Derek.
Yes. So this spaceship comes down at the start of Teenagers from Outer Space and lands at the edge of a town, like out in the desert, and these aliens climb out. But they're people in jumpsuits, like janitor or gas station attendant jumpsuits. And they have a mission, which we learn kind of in a little exposition dump. They say they are here on the planet to use it as like ranch land for their Gargan herds. And they drag like a little hutch out of the back of the spaceship, and we get like a quick little cut into the cage that they've got, and the Gargan is a lobster. It just is a little lobster in the cage.
Do you know if it's an actual live lobster?
It looks like that to me. I think it's alive. That's my impression. But these aliens are named Thor and Saul and Derek. And yes, wouldn't you know that the one who has latent human sympathies is the one raised with a human name? The parents didn't think that through. Gotta give him like a legendary alien-sounding name.
They're just people. They're just people who say things weird. They're not what makes them aliens? Is there convergent evolution? Why do they just look like a dude in a janitor suit? It doesn't make sense to me, Brian.
There was a line about that in the film of like, we developed the same or something like that when he's talking to
Okay.
Betty in the field.
The lore is there.
We developed the same, but very far apart, or something like that.
Right? It's like, to think that across the stars we were made the same.
Yes, we were made the same. Yeah.
Brian, what percent of this movie could you enact from start to finish?
Not much, but it was a good refresher watching it again. This is maybe the third or fourth time that I've watched it. Thor, of course, doesn't care about Earthlings. Anything that crosses his path, he's gonna vaporize. So there's like a little dog, like a Jack Russell Terrier, running around and nipping at the aliens, and he blasts it with a ray gun. And we find out that the secret special effect in this movie, the one that is really their special sauce, is like a smash cut to a mid-class skeleton. It's like the human is there, one frame, click the ray gun, and then you have a collapsing skeleton where you can see it's held together with wires and stuff.
Drills, like screws. I think there's a hook on the head too.
I was thinking of your cat skeleton when because they do it for the dog skeleton too. I was like, oh, it looks like a real dog skeleton. But you have a cat skeleton, Brian.
Yes, I do. So I guess maybe that's something we need to incorporate. I'm taking notes of, okay, well, what is in these that we haven't done yet? Yeah, blasts the dog, and then it's bones, and bleeding heart Derek walks over, and he looks down in the bones, and he finds that there's a dog tag in there with the dog's name on it. He says, look, Thor, intelligent beings, sentient beings, means we can't raise our gargans here.
Alien hippie.
Thor says, dude, what are you talking about? We didn't come all this way just to call off the mission. Let the gargans loose. And they have like a squabble. And actually there's like a bunch of exposition because Derek says that he's actually been a part of this like underground resistance. I guess the alien planet has like a totalitarian government. And he says, but I've been reading the secret texts, and I know that once we had families and individualism and the American way.
And he takes the book out of his pocket and gives it to them.
He's like, here's the good word, Thor. And they go to apprehend Derek, but he is able to get away and run off into the town. There's a beat where they weren't sure if the Gargan could handle the Earth atmosphere, but then they realize actually it like loves the Earth atmosphere so much that it was briefly in like ecstatic shock. But yeah, it's like perfect. Gargans love Earth. So Thor gets sent off to pursue Derek into the town because the captain of the ship says, we gotta bring Derek back because he's the son of the leader. Which, you know, it's a hypocrite. It's like, I guess the leader can have family ties. Nobody else, though.
Because he's gonna become the next leader, right?
That's right. So, yeah, I guess they have like a monarchy thing. I don't know. I like the TV thing that the leader calls them on. We're gonna have that for sure.
Are the aliens all white people? Is there like different skin colors of the aliens as well?
I don't think there's any women either.
Oh, interesting.
Also, these are not teenagers.
That's a good point. It's
good call.
Blatant false advertising.
Very important. No one in this movie looks like a teen. But also they say people looked older back then. But yeah, I would bet money nobody here is a teenager.
They are like movie teenagers. At least Derek is, I would say. It's like visibly not a teenager, but you get that we're supposed to think they're a teenager, you know?
Yeah, but they never said that other than the title, they never say that they're teenagers, except for the fact that they kill old people. But does that mean anyone over 20, 30?
We're out, Dan.
I don't know.
We're too old. Apparently it was released in England with the title The Gargan Terror, which is a way better title.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
But I do like the tagline on the Teenagers from Space poster, which says, "Thrill-crazed space kids blasting the flesh off humans."
So I guess I was kind of assuming, well, we haven't met all of the supposed teenagers. I guess we've met the teenagers from outer space, but not the other teenagers. But I kind of assumed that they were like high school kids, but I guess there's no reason to think that. They could just be young adults.
They might have just decided on that title as like a marketing gimmick.
I would say, now that I've thought about it, might have is maybe too soft. It feels like a virtual guarantee. They're like, teenagers, sure, there we go.
It's like, we want teenagers to see it, so we should mention teenagers. But Thor's got to go and be like the Terminator, questioning people and tracking down Derek in this town. But Derek has found his way to the home of this family that's got a room to rent, where the population of the house is Betty, a young woman, and her grandfather. And they don't ask many questions. They're like, "Here, come live with us. You can rent the room, even if you don't have any money. You can just..." You seem chill.
They're like, yeah. Grandpa's judge of character here is sometimes a little bit questionable. It's like this guy with no ID and no money and can barely speak a coherent sentence of English is like, yeah, just go ahead. Whenever you get around to paying me, that's fine. I guess it's what the granddaughter pushes for, though.
That's true. She's immediately very welcoming of Derek. And, like, we see him talk to several people in the town, and then shortly thereafter, Thor is questioning those same people. So there's, like, a gas station attendant.
Can we talk about, oh, this might be after that. I was going to say the scene where Thor is in the car and he's trying to ask the guy how the car works. I could not stop laughing during that scene.
Give us a little bit of the flavor.
I don't know. It was like, tell me about that. I guess he's driving manual. What is this? What is this vehicle you're piloting? And the guy's like, I didn't pick you up to teach you how to drive. And it's just pretty funny.
Yeah, and immediately, anybody who questions Thor for a second, the ray gun comes out.
He's got a quick trigger finger. Not making a lot of friends.
He's like, you will tell me which is the accelerator and which is the decelerator.
Why would who even cares? Also, I was wondering, why is Derek driving the grandpa's car? I've never piloted this type of vehicle, yet he could drive around town in it.
Grandpa's just very trusting.
Yeah.
And soon there's like a body count mounting up, because if you talk back to Thor too long, you get vaporized. There's skeletons at the gas station. Betty and Derek go over to a pool party. And by the way, Betty seems to be dating this guy named Joe, who's like a reporter for the paper, played by director Tom Graff. But she, like, immediately shuns him aside. And he's like, oh, you're at a pool party with who? Who's Derek? But he's busy because he's got to be reporting on these mysterious skeletons that are appearing all over the place. Also, I read that apparently Tom Graff and the Derek actor were hooking up.
Whoa.
Interesting.
Like, behind the scenes, they were actually gay together.
Past drama.
It's making me think of Ed Wood with all the weird relationships and stuff in there.
Have you seen Ed Wood, Lindsay?
No.
Oh, that's a good one. Tim Burton biopic of the guy who directed Plan 9 from Outer Space, and he's played by Johnny Depp. And there's a lot of good, like, cameo performances in there.
About this point in the film, I started noticing that their dialogue and mouths don't always line up. So, and when I read the Wikipedia, apparently, yeah, he did pre-record a lot of the dialogue or have them lip synchronize it later. I definitely noticed.
I feel like quite a few public domain movies of this ilk had to do that. A lot of, I don't know if they would have called it ADR then, but like once you're in the booth, record the dialogue. We watched last year Manos, Hands of Fate, where the whole movie is like that.
Unreal. Yeah. I feel like that, yeah, just in general, it was both they were doing it a lot and they weren't good at it. So it was like really noticeable. I remember when we watched 8.5, I thought there was actually like a glitch in the stream I was watching because of how much of there was of that and how out of sync it was. And I think foreign films did that too.
Yeah, Kylos, the teacher, when he showed us that in the film history class, what was that class called? Story of Film. Lindsey tested out of it. I could have tested out of it too, but I wanted to have one more class where like everybody in the program was there together.
Everybody but me.
Anyway, he showed us 8.5, and like the lead into the movie was he said, so in Italy, they didn't really care about the accuracy of dubbing. They were just used to, I guess, like in spaghetti westerns, they would have actors from a bunch of different countries. And in some cases, the actors would just speak whatever language they happened to speak. And then they would have, you know, the like dubbers from each country dub the movie. And so there was never, at least according to the professor, strict attention to syncing up the lips. There's a bit of meandering. It's like they're eluding Thor, and Thor is chasing, and because of the carnage that is adding up, more of the town is becoming aware. There's like a scientist who finds out what's going on, and the reporter is running around telling people. At one point, Thor gets in like a car crash, and he's briefly in custody.
Yeah, this movie has an effect. I don't quite know how to describe it, but it's like, it's slow, but also there's a lot of stuff, but also it's not that long of a movie. So somehow there's a lot of stuff happening, but it's slow and it fits into a tight frame. But still, after like, there's like a whole bunch of stuff happen. I was like, man, we got to be getting close to the climax. And then I looked at the little scroll bar and it said, you've watched 35 minutes out of an hour and a half. I was like, how is that even possible? How could I be barely a third into this film right now? Multiple ray gun deaths and betrayals and chases already.
It's like all the information that matters, you know, in the first 5 minutes, because there's just this exposition blitz. And then it's like a cat and mouse game for most of the runtime, where they're just chasing and evading, and people are getting zapped.
The exposition talk is so funny, which we'll get to later in the Lost Skeleton of Cadavra. They definitely mimic it pretty well, but you know, the planet where we're from, we have the Gargans, and they're from our planet, you know, where we're from.
And that's right, because the Gargan has been left to nourish itself in the Earth wilderness. And specifically, the place that they left the Gargan is this cave that's part of Bronson Canyon in Los Angeles. And if you watch this type of movie, B movies from the 50s and 60s, especially science fiction, especially like westerns, you see this cave all the time. It's just used and reused. And actually, I've watched YouTubers go there and visit this cave, and it's not much of a cave. It's actually like a tunnel. It's like it only looks like a cave if you shoot it from this one angle kind of off to the side. Otherwise, if you look at it straight on, you can see through to the other side of the cliff.
Brian, we should go shoot there.
We should go there. If I hadn't gotten COVID on my Los Angeles trip, I was going to go visit.
Was that the same one in the Skeletons movie?
It was.
Yeah, that's sick. That's what I was trying to find out right now.
Also very prominent in the 1953 movie Robot Monster. Also actually used in the 1960s Batman TV show as the Batcave opening. So, like, even since the silent days, filmmakers were going to Bronson Canyon. And there's, like, supercuts online that you can see all the movies that rehashed it. While they're running around trying to get away from the rest of the alien crew, Derek is bonding with Betty. And, yeah, they end up in this field where they're like hooking up in very like G-rated terms. Oh, man, I'm trying to remember what Derek says. He's like, "And I like you very much." Something like that.
Yeah, he says, "You make me angry, but I like you." Because she never listens to what he says. He says, "Stay in the car," and then she comes out of the car like 5 seconds later.
That was it. I'm glad you remembered.
But she's this crazy woman who doesn't do what she's told.
But before any hanky-panky can occur, there's this, like, monster noise, and they look over the horizon, and the Gargan, which has grown to gargantuan size, is looming in silhouette, and it's a lobster propped up with a little stick, and it's, like, flailing around. Also, the music in this movie is, well, it got recycled later, and is also the soundtrack of Night of the Living Dead in 1968.
Wait, really?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. I did not notice that.
Romero reused these tracks, and so what is hilarious to me is that I have, like, bone-chilling terror that's, like, pulling at me every time I hear one of these music stings, because Night of the Living Dead is a really scary movie. But, like, just goofy stuff is happening here. And this is the movie that originally, like, used this stock music.
That's funny.
So, Dan, like, imagine when the Gargan comes over the hill, it's the music from when they meet the first zombie in Night of the Living Dead. Like, in the opening scene, they're coming to get you, Barbara. So they're running from this Gargan. And I think when Thor was in the car crash, he lost his ray gun, but it, like, got damaged. So they're trying to shoot the Gargan with the ray gun, but it's not powerful enough. And the plan that Derek comes up with is hook the ray gun into the power grid, and that'll make it strong enough that they can zap the Gargan.
He called it, they said disintegrator. Is that the same as the ray gun? I was kind of like, okay, we're hooking something up to a power grid. I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah, it's the same thing. He has some discussion with Betty where he's like, "Do you not know of the particle disintegrator?"
Okay, gotcha.
You may not be ready for this, but your kids are gonna love it. Then the next thing is they get word that the aliens are coming back, more aliens. Like, they've brought the leader to the planet, and maybe they're going to bring more Gargans or something. There's just, like, this additional fleet that's coming in.
I think the fleet has all the Gargans in it.
That sounds right.
They're bringing them to live on the Earth, safely away from their own planet.
I love that this is all about farming. Just, like, ranching. You don't get a lot of space movies about the, like, economics of alien ranching.
There's a lot of, like, kind of 50s middle America undercurrent. You got, like, the fear of Sputnik type stuff in there, but also just, like, it's a Leave It to Beaver style hometown where, like, oh, here's a guy, well, yeah, he could live in our house even though we've never met him and he can't pay.
Yeah, I wrote down, why is everyone so trusting and friendly?
It's like, ask somebody how to get to a specific house at the gas station, and they'll just tell you, "Oh yeah, it's the third house. You go 2 blocks up and turn right. It's got a yellow umbrella in the yard. You can't miss it."
That beat was parodied in the Lost Skeleton of Cadavra opening scene too.
But Derek is totally in on protecting the humans now. He's gone totally native. Doesn't like the other aliens at all. And so he calls in an airstrike on his own location. He's like, "Okay, fleet." He's messaging them on, like, their telegraph, which, by the way, I noticed this time when he's, like, turning knobs on a little machine, it cuts to a close-up on the device and it just says multi-channel mixer. And I looked up
literally a sound mixer.
I looked up the model number, And, like, it doesn't hide that there's a big musical note on the side of it.
I was wondering why they can't read. He can't read, but all of their gear has English letters and numbers.
That's funny. Maybe it's like Superman's S, where it's actually a Kryptonian symbol, and you don't read it like the letter S.
Yeah.
Is it? I can't remember. Is it explained why they speak English? Or that's also something that just developed?
We were made the same, Dan. That's all you need. It's like listen with your heart in Pocahontas. It just happens. If you love each other, you instantaneously learn English.
It's your heart song.
I also thought it was interesting before he sacrifices himself. He says some really cryptic stuff to Betty where she's like, but you promised you would never leave the earth. And he's like, I will keep my promise. Or sometimes some of us must die, and that is okay. And then just goes off, and she's like, I wonder what's going to happen.
I will make the earth my home, and I will never leave it.
Yeah.
And yeah, he like radios the fleet his coordinates, and I guess they don't have brakes on these things because they just all crash into one spot on the earth, killing themselves and Derek in the process. It's like he probably could have told him somewhere else to crash.
Or I'm wondering why there wasn't like a huge explosion, or why he assumed Betty and them would all be fine when a bunch of presumably large ships crashed into the earth. I guess it's not the point.
Yeah, we don't really get a sense of how many ships there are. The leader had already come down and was like talking with the rest of them. I don't have the answers.
Also, I think it was funny how there was that note about, oh, but how will the society function while you're gone, leader? And he says, they don't know I'm gone. And then Derek says, well, if they were to realize you were gone, there would be a revolution. And like looks in the camera. But and that's what he wants. That's what his book made him want to do.
Right. It's like everything just happened to line up perfectly for Derek's plan to cause as much chaos on Alien Homeworld as he could.
Do you think they reshaped their society after that?
Maybe. I mean, like, how would they... I guess they'd find out that there was a massive calamity and, like, the whole hierarchy was taken out. But, yeah, you'd have to have, like, people who were there supporting the underground, like, come to the fore with their message. And maybe that was all set up and we just don't see it.
The leader's rocking a beard. It's a pretty good beard.
He's probably the oldest one out of all of them.
Not a teenager.
No.
Means they have to kill him soon anyway.
I do want to see like what their homeworld is like. I want to know more about this population of aliens. But there we go. We did it. We watched Teenagers from Outer Space from 1959.
I like Betty's bangs too. Speaking of
Me too.
hair situations. She looked like someone and I couldn't place who it was.
I thought she looked like Betty Boop.
Yeah, there's definitely some of that energy there.
I was also thinking like Betty on the Flintstones.
Anyone named Betty, they all look the same.
I guess. Betty synergy. My favorite scene of the movie in unironic terms was the scene where like so much stuff happens in this, just to repeat that. It's like you think all the things that could have happened, that needed to happen, have happened, and then more stuff happens. But at one point, there's a gunfight where it's ray gun versus bullets. And then the bad alien, I forget his name, gets shot. And he like forces a doctor to do surgery on him. And then like all of a sudden, we're doing like close up, shaky cam, subjective perspectives, and like expressionistic lighting on the faces for like 45 seconds.
Right, because he's like hallucinating because they're operating without anesthetic. Because he doesn't want to be taken advantage of.
Yeah, that was crazy. I felt the peril. It was perilous.
Also, like, I don't, no offense to these cars, but when I see one of these 1950s cars in one of the first 2 or 3 shots, like, my brain just immediately goes to, I'm just watching a stupid movie, just because, like, all the movies I've seen in the past year that have these 1950s land yachts that have, like, the little fins on the back have been in movies that Brian's made me watch for this purpose.
To me, they look like death traps. It's like, just think about being in an accident in one of these cars. You would get wrecked.
Oh, yeah.
No seatbelts. Everything is... no crumple zones in the 50s.
Which, again, why is Derek like the default drive? Why does Betty not know how to drive? If she doesn't, she's probably still better.
It's the 1950s in America, I guess.
Well, they had the nurse drive. The nurse was driving her own car.
Okay.
I was going to say that too until she did that. And she was about to sacrifice herself too, and then Thor just decided not to kill her for some reason.
Maybe you don't take out medics in a war.
Yeah.
She's got that Red Cross protection.
I was wondering what the ray gun actually was. Like, just, I guess, a prop gun or something. But that would be, like, a cool prop to own from this movie, is one of those guns.
Yeah, it looks like it has a mirror in it. That makes it...
Yeah, it's like it always will get, like, pointed at the camera and it'll flash. And then that we get like a lightning wipe to the skeleton falling down. So it's fun. It's quirky. It was low budget, obviously. I read that Graff only made a couple movies. He worked early on with Roger Corman. And then he, at least according to Wikipedia, just taking Wikipedia at face value, it said he had like this like messianic religious breakdown where he like briefly tried to be a cult leader and didn't draw followers, and then he might have ended up killing himself.
I also read that.
Bummer. Sorry, that might be an insufficient thing to say there, but yeah, bummer.
Bummer indeed. So kind of, the Torgo story. It's like you're in one memorable B movie and then you're gone. A candle snuffed. But you live on in infamy.
Yeah, I also read that he did everything on this film, like wrote, directed, edited, was in it. That's crazy.
It's a passion project.
Yeah.
And like compared to, apparently the Ed Wood movies had budgets of like $50,000. This had a budget of like $14,000. So even for the 50s, even for this type of movie, really threadbare.
I'll put that in the inflation calculator.
But it really didn't look that bad. It looks decent. Like, there's not too many times where I'm looking at it and I'm like, this is just aggressively ugly or bad or poorly made. It's like, it looks generic and kind of unchallenging, uninteresting, but it's not really like aggressively ugly or poorly edited or anything like that.
Yeah, there's no blank gray walls as sets like Ed Wood.
Right.
So $14,000 in 1959 is $150,000 today.
Wow.
That's still pretty low budget.
Are we ready to talk about the second movie that we watched?
Sure.
Okay, so this one's called The Lost Skeleton of Cadavra. And I believe it came out in 2001. It says it came out in 2001, although a lot of stuff on the DVD said copyright 2004. So maybe it didn't get a DVD release until a little later. But I learned about this one from internet reviewer James Rolfe. For a long time in October, he would do horror movie reviews every day in a series called Monster Madness. And one of the years, he talked about this movie, which I probably would never have heard of otherwise, and billed it as a tribute to the 50s alien movies, but made contemporarily, like, modern era, but evoking that older period. So I think I got this DVD Christmas of 2011, and I thought it was hilarious. Like, I laughed really, really hard. Some of the humor has worn off, and we'll talk about why. But, I mean, I guess the last movie we talked, before doing any recap, like, first impressions. Like, how are you feeling watching this one?
So I don't think I watched it in the ideal circumstances. I watched it with headphones and, like, you know, by myself. I was doing a couple chores as I was watching. I feel like the ideal circumstances for watching this film is like in a college dorm with beers flowing and buddies and laughing. And it's kind of like how I watched Black Dynamite, which is a similar genre parody pastiche that like takes all of the stylistic influences of a genre, but rather than like 50s Z movies, that one's like 70s blaxploitation films. And that it's like the hardest I've ever laughed was watching that movie. And I feel like this one could have had that energy if I saw it. Maybe if I was a little younger too. I don't know. And like, but it actually did overall charm me, and we can talk about some of the reasons why. But I do wish that I had kind of watched it in a group, you know? So I feel like it's a good group movie, group watching experience movie.
I agree. Got to have a group.
I enjoyed it, though not as much as Teenagers from Outer Space. And I'm about to bring some theoretical stuff into here. But I studied in college about my minor was in gender, sexuality, and women's studies, and I had a class on like queer art and camp, and Susan Sontag is like the originator of the theory of camp, and one of the things that she says is that camp is either naive or else wholly conscious, and pure camp is always naive. So it's less satisfying to watch something that is doing camp on purpose than it is to watch the naive camp, which I kind of agreed with. It was like less satisfying to me to know that they did it on purpose.
That's an interesting take. Yeah. It's like there's charm, like an ineffable charm to something that is done in earnest, done not trying to be silly and campy, to your point. I can buy that for sure.
Yeah, I think that's well said. But this movie knows what it's trying to be, and definitely leans in.
It's really a love letter to it also. Like it is self-parody, and it is celebrating and enjoying instead of like making fun of, I guess.
That's one of the things that I loved about it. It was that it's just like it's a warm-hearted movie. It's having fun. It's not cynical. It's not like degrading any of its characters or even its very existence. It's like this is the most fun thing that anyone could possibly be doing is making this movie, you know?
Also, I feel like it was designed so that if you were flipping through the channels and this was on, you would just think it was a 50s movie. Until you started listening to it, and then you'd probably start scratching your head.
Well, it looked, even from the beginning, it looked exactly like Teenagers from Outer Space.
They did a really good job of matching the cinematography and like the editing style, the way that they'll like point and laugh at stock footage animals, and then you cut and you see the squirrel, and then you cut back.
There's a good blend of references to movies that we've talked about in here. There was definitely some Manos in there. Obviously, Teenagers from Outer Space some of that was in there. If I had to guess, that seemed like kind of the main reference point. And then a little bit of Plan 9, I was thinking of once or twice too.
Yep, that's my feeling as well. I feel like they must have been drawn on Teenagers from Outer Space because there's the whole escaped mutant plot line that the alien ship comes down and the mutant gets out. It's like, okay, well, that's Teenagers from Outer Space. But it starts out, there's this couple driving down the road into the wilderness. It's a scientist named Paul, played by the director Larry Blameyer, and his wife Betty. And they're looking for a meteor. They're looking for a meteor made of atmospherium. So it's this, like, radioactive element that they're searching for. And he's got, like, a detector that can scan for it. But there's other people who also want the atmospherium. So pretty soon, this little miniature alien ship comes down and lands in a field. And so, Lindsay, did you see the parallel to our ship where it's like cut in on just the lower part of the ship?
Yes, for sure. Which, going back to Teenagers, I thought the way they did the ship was interesting because they made it shaped like a drill so that it made sense that it was small, I guess, and there were more people inside it than could really fit inside it.
Yeah, that's cool. The shot of it coming down and it drills down into the ground. And then on top of the drill is a little saucer. And then that's what you see. Whereas here it's like a paper mache kind of rocket cone thing that flops down.
Yeah, and then the miniature later is just like a Pringles can.
Yeah, it's just like a big silver cylinder. It kind of looks like the SpaceX rockets, actually. The recent the Musk rockets. But a couple comes out who are aliens in the jumpsuits like Teenagers from Outer Space, although these are a little bit more deluxe. They're like shiny. They're like Mylar jumpsuits. And the aliens are named Crowbar and Lattice. And they too need atmospherium. That's like what powers the spaceship.
So, Brian, you're saying these things that are happening, but just like saying that a thing happened, I feel like doesn't capture the essence of when something happens in this movie, because it's always delivered with like the most ridiculous, stilted, over repetitive dialogue. Like the one that, I mean, I feel like the comedy of it wears down a little bit over time, but like I was laughing pretty hard at the beginning when they were talking about how he's a scientist looking for atmospherium and she's a scientist's wife, and they go back and forth like 5 times on variations of, well, I'm a scientist's wife and you're a scientist and you need to know such things because I'm a wife of someone who is a scientist, and like just permutations on that said with a straight face.
Yes. In some ways, it's very hard to be the wife of a scientist. In other ways, it's good. Very good. And same with when the aliens land too. They keep saying, you know, the planet Marva, where we are from. And we have a mutant from the planet Marva. That is where we live. Right.
It's actually like, yeah, this is actually not too far off from what the real thing is like.
Isn't it interesting that the ways of different people on different planets differ?
Yeah. And Brian, like, I wonder how you can incorporate that without taking too much screen time.
Right. Don't beat it to death. Don't do it just over and over and over again, but have some of that type of dialogue, I think, is important.
And the direction to the actors as well. I mean, depending how far you want to lean into that.
That is a great strength of this movie, I think, is like they told the actors to act badly, but they like sell it. This whole movie, I think if you watch 30 seconds of it, you would think, okay, this is the thing that they are paying tribute to.
And it's funny because the Earthlings also kind of talk like aliens. They talk like how aliens would think humans would talk.
What does she say? She's like, if I wanted a quiet life, I wouldn't have married a man who studies rocks.
And their logic is also very strange. Like later on, I know we're not at the cabin yet, but he says, as a scientist, I wish I could focus on other things like cabins and bicycles. The most just like, how did you get to that sentence?
Larry Blameyer has a YouTube channel where at least he used to upload these videos that were like vines, where he would just say like a little sentence that was of his idiosyncratic style. My favorite one was he says, "I've taken to carrying a spoon. You never know when there might be soup."
So I think there's a balancing act in a movie like this where you got to have the right amount of like over the top energy. Because if you have too much, it's just like flop sweat. It's just like, okay, you know that you're funny and you're silly and you're doing a reference here. And like kind of you get more negativity from what Lindsay was talking about a minute ago, where if something's too knowing, it loses the charm. And obviously this is knowing, but I feel like there's a way that you can sell it, you can execute it that has like almost the right level of surreality to it, I would say, where it's got like this kooky energy to it, but it's still like not flying off the rails. And it also needs to just have the right amount of sparkle to the writing to work. Like, yeah, it's got kind of the same joke, but like it's just got enough wit to it and just enough timing and variation on it that you can tell that this person is like actually a funny person who's doing this. You know, it wouldn't be funny if you just did the thing badly. Like you got to also be funny. And I felt like this guy, I've never watched anything else by him, I don't think, YouTube or movie or otherwise, but you can just tell he's a funny guy who's making a funny thing that happens to be like doing this parody and this homage to this type of movie.
I'm glad you said surreality, because a big part of camp theory is that camp is all about drawing attention to artifice. And whereas like most movies, it's about the invisible editing, the continuity, like you should not remember that you're watching a movie while you're watching it. But this movie and other camp, whether it's pure camp, the naive camp or not, it's all about like, it brings attention to the fact that they're all acting. And then you start thinking about, oh, like, how did they make this scene? How did they do this and this? And it's celebrating the extra stylized stuff. And it's also pointing out that people in their everyday life are also performing. And it's kind of just self-aware of like the awkwardness of being a person and performing.
In addition to the human couple and the alien couple, there is another person prowling around on the mountain looking for atmospherium, and it's this rival scientist named Roger Fleming, and he's our antagonist. I've actually seen this actor in other movies, like real movies. So he actually has had like a career, but one of my favorite cuts in the movie, the Paul and Betty, her name's Betty too, by the way. The human couple, Paul and Betty, they are renting this cabin on the mountain that they're going to stay at while they are looking for the meteor. And another like shooting star goes across the sky, which turns out to be the spaceship that lands with the alien couple. And when they see the shooting star go over, the main character, Paul, Larry Blameyer, says, I wonder. And it cuts to the rival scientist out in the woods, and he says, I also wonder.
Self-aware. It's they know they're in a movie, basically.
Yeah, it's like a Deadpool thing. But when I saw that the first time, I was cracking up. And he wants atmospherium, but it's because he's power hungry. Whereas Paul's yearning for atmospherium is framed positively because he wants to provide benefits for mankind, many of them good.
Love those good benefits.
Which benefits are not good?
Think about what this could mean for humanity, Betty. It could mean a lot. I know.
I'm a scientist. And I'm a scientist's wife.
And part of Roger Fleming's plan is he wants the atmospherium so that he can bring back to life the Lost Skeleton of Cadavra. Because he knows that down in Bronson Canyon, in the little cave, the same one from 50 years earlier, in Teenagers from Outer Space lies this skeleton that supposedly has some great powers, but it can't be alive and walk around unless it has atmospherium. But it can still, like, talk telepathically to people because my skeleton brain lives. But, like, you never know when it's gonna talk because it can just suddenly decide that it's, like, inanimate again. He says, I sleep now.
Yeah, I thought the skeleton was the only character who wasn't 100% talking in that, like, 50s voice. Because he would be like, you idiot.
I like the idea that the skeleton is the most human out of all of them.
Yeah.
The skeleton also played by Larry Blameyer.
What can't he do?
Whereas, as he's credited at the end of the film, and introducing the skeleton. No further explanation there.
People start converging at the cabin.
Oh my god, the stairs scene was so funny. They come and they have to learn. They don't know what stairs are because they're aliens, which this movie did a lot better of, like, they're aliens, so they shouldn't know anything. But the line, what do we do? Step on them until we are high enough to enter. And then there's just like a 2-minute long shot of them struggling to climb the stairs.
This was pretty good.
I'm glad that worked for you because that's one of the moments that, like, I thought it was hilarious the first time I watched, and now I find it so tedious. But you're right. My favorite characters, I think, are this alien couple. Because they've always got these, like, wide, terrified, surprised eyes at everything.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, they always have this dialogue about how do we deal with this, and it's always so stilted and funny.
There's a lot more physical comedy in this film also than in the last one. And this is definitely part of that. But then it works, like, it adds, because then you have the stilted, like, vocal performance, but then you also have the exaggerated physical performance.
Right. The aliens have this thing called the transmutatron, which they prop up, like, on a little rock, and they say they're going to use it to blend in with the humans, and they click the button, and it, like, gives them a suit and a dress, so they're not in their shiny jumpsuits anymore. But then they also decide that they need to have aliases to blend in. But because they don't know what human names are, they pick alias names just as ridiculous as their alien names. And so Crowbar and Lattice become Turgasso and Bammon.
They sound like names my 4-year-old would make up.
And anytime that Paul is talking to Bammon, I crack up. Just he's like, but Bammon. So what do you do, Bammon? He says, I can do anything, Paul. I have no restrictions. So 2 of the couples are there at the cabin. Meanwhile, Roger Fleming is drawing near. And he too wants to get close because I think at this point they've taken possession of the atmospherium or they just know that this scientist is on the right track to finding it. But he says, if I make myself a date, I won't seem so alone. So Roger Fleming finds the transmutatron and he points it at 4 different forest animals. And clicks the button, and it creates a character called Animala, who is played by an actress named Jennifer Blair. And I really like this character, too. Because she's just got, like, a black, like, Catwoman skin-tight jumpsuit and has these animal mannerisms.
And claws. It looks like she's in Cats, the musical.
So she too has to learn to act like a human. And yeah, she's always like hissing and crawling around and saying "rawr."
It's sucking people's fingers.
So did I read somewhere, Brian, maybe it was in your notes or maybe it was on Wikipedia or something, that she's played by Larry Braymire's wife?
That's right. So eventually the plan that they're going to come up with is like have Animala hit on Paul. Have Animala seduce Paul, and that's how we'll get the meteor away from him. And so it's like framed as this clandestine romance, this temptress Animala, but yes, they're really married.
That makes sense. There's like a trope where directors cast their hot wives to be hot in movies, and I was getting some of that energy from this here.
But so all these three couples are at the dinner table for this like impromptu party, but they're all like looking at each other for cues because only the one couple is actually human. So like the animal woman buries her face in the mashed potatoes, and then immediately the aliens do it too. And one of my biggest laughs was Roger saying, "Everyone's so hungry." Because he's the other one who's a human, but he's trying to put on this ruse. He's like, "Oh."
But he knows that the other people are aliens, right?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, there's like a scene where Roger says he talks to the aliens as an aside, and they agree that they're going to work together to try to get the atmospherium away from Paul. And yeah, this long circuitous discussion of, well, that would be like sharing. I would have some, and you would have some. Yes, we would have some, and you also. And then the skeleton interrupts and is like trying to mind control people to bring him the atmospherium. And like there are times with rewatches that it drags for me. What was your impression, first timers?
I definitely feel like it doesn't have the juice for a full 90 minutes. I was feeling that a little bit towards the end too. Like this should be one of those movies that's like 75 minutes long or something like that. That's honestly my biggest complaint with the film, is that it like stretches its jokes and its entire premise and shtick a little further than it needs to. I was getting a little bit of like, okay, I get it. Yeah, this is okay, sure. Towards the end, but I mean, I was still fairly fond of it.
Good.
Yeah, I had the same experience.
Roger, though, double crosses the aliens. He says it's really like I'm sharing with myself. And he takes the atmospherium and gives it to the skeleton to bring it to life. So then it's Roger and Animala and the skeleton ruling the day for like 5 minutes. And they have some funny discussions where, because the skeleton just berates Roger. Like, Roger didn't think this through. The skeleton's calling him an idiot. And yeah, just like tearing him down. My favorite line in the whole movie is Roger says, "All skeletons hate me. They always have. Ever since I was a child, I've been hated by skeletons."
This made me laugh pretty hard too.
And there's a scene where the skeleton is like mind controlling the aliens and like forcing them to dance for his amusement. It's kind of like the old Star Trek episode where Spock has to dance. And it's like, no, he can't do that. He's a logical being. It's torture for him to like do passionate activities.
It was kind of funny when the skeleton and the aliens were like fighting for mind control over Betty, and then she had to made a weird sentence like combining what they were telling her to do. Give the atmospherium to Crowbar and Lattice, or give it, and then I don't remember what the other sentence was, but then she ended up saying something about a crowbar covered in lettuce.
Yeah, and somebody else talks about an Amish terrarium. and Paul says, "Why? No one needs an Amish terrarium. The Amish deserve to be free like you and me. They shouldn't be under glass.
It's inhumane.
Speaking of Betty, I thought she looked a lot like Naomi Watts in Mulholland Drive here.
I was thinking about Mulholland Drive too.
I thought she looked like Elizabeth Banks.
I can see that too, yeah.
What if in Mulholland Drive they had the scene where they like pass out and then the final third of the movie they're in this movie? The Lost Skeleton by David Lynch.
That would be something.
Meanwhile, this mutant that had escaped from the ship when it landed is going around committing horrible mutilations, they say. There's like a few bystander characters that are there periodically to like bloat the body count and be like the harbinger that was discussed in Cabin in the Woods when we talked about that movie. It's like you got it when you're going into a spooky place to start a horror movie, you got to have somebody give you directions.
Ranger Brad is my favorite because I was most locked in this movie at the beginning, I think, but then it reminded me of the classic Office gag where Bob Vance always introduces himself as Bob Vance, Vance Refrigeration, except here he's Ranger Brad.
I'm Ranger Brad. You can call me Ranger Brad. Most folks do. But the mutant falls in love with Betty. It runs into Betty and like carries her off for a while like Creature from the Black Lagoon or pretty much any like early horror poster. You got a monster carrying a woman.
I love that you can see the feet on the mutant.
Right, it's this rubber suit with like 3 big eyes. And of course it's all black and white, but I imagine it's like green and the eyes are yellow or something. That's the vibe I get. I think that's how it looks on the poster.
Kind of floopish.
Yeah, it's a Foogly for sure. But eventually Betty gets away from the mutant, gets back to the family, and meanwhile, Paul has been having his tryst where he's been getting hypnotized by Anamala, and they have this conversation where they've both experienced this, like, flirtation with supernatural infidelity. Where Betty says, "The mutant looked deeper into my eyes than a human ever has." And Paul says, "Anamala danced like I've never seen a woman dance before." Then they kind of break out of their reverie and they say, "We've had quite a day." It's like tension in the perfect 1950s nuclear family. Temptation pulling at that bond.
Right. To me, this was like a little bit of a parody of the 50s, like classic nuclear family vibe of the teenagers movie that doesn't feature any teenagers.
Remember that the skeleton is forcing the aliens to dance for his amusement. Paul and Betty barge in to set them free. And they bring the mutant with them. The mutant's trailing Betty, and so it kind of plows into what the skeleton thought was a triumphant victory fest. He's like trying to marry the alien woman away from the alien man. So kind of some ookiness there. But we don't linger there too long because now we've got a fight between the mutant and the skeleton. And only the mutant can move.
So he's like just carrying the skeleton prop around and shaking it. I was thinking of a lot of things here. So one is, well, 2 Arrested Development connections. One is when they have the episode in the 3rd season where they dress up as Godzilla and they have like George Michael come down with a jetpack for whatever reason.
And they're fighting in Tiny Town.
Yeah.
They're like, they created a model town outside the window to make the development project look bigger than it really was. Like forced perspective, but then suddenly there's kaiju in the model town.
And it's for Japanese investors. And the other one that I was thinking of from Arrested Development is like when they're getting forced to dance is in one episode when Joe becomes president of the Bluth Company and he throws a party and people aren't having fun, so he orders them to dance or they'll be fired, and so they start dancing against their will. Same energy here.
I also like the part when the skeleton like mentally ties up the aliens and then they can't move and she says, "Get the ropes off of me." And then Paul goes and tries to take the ropes off, and Crowbar is like, "They're mental ropes that hold us."
I think the actor playing Crowbar might be my favorite. It says his name is Andrew Parks, but he's always got these like wide eyes, and his delivery of the lines always makes me laugh, even after rewatches. Like at one point, Lattice, the alien lady, says, "Crowbar," and she's telling him about something, and he says, "You need not yell because of my proximity." Like I'm right here. But yeah, he always sells whatever ridiculous dialogue he says. Or they ask him something, they're like, would you have a seat? He says, "I'm not sure. How would one go about finding that out?"
That's a line that you took right from the movie.
I did. I put that in my film.
You just stole that.
I just stole that line. Also, I'm Facebook friends with Larry Blameyer, so I'm going to ask him if he would be willing to provide voice work for our film. I want to have a scene where he calls in as the alien leader, and then we'll use that audio if he's willing.
Oh, that would be sick.
That would be pretty cool. We should have had him on the pod.
But the mutant fights with the skeleton. They have this fight where they're grasping at each other, and of course the skeleton can't move on its own. But the mutant is able to hurl the skeleton off a cliff, and it's destroyed. But the mutant, too, succumbs to its wounds. So then the alien couple and the human couple have but to climb down to the bottom of the hill and get the atmospherium out of the skeleton carcass. And they kind of stroll down the path, musing that now they are bonded by international friendship. Intergalactic friendship.
I bet he's gonna get those space recipes.
They do talk. There's the scene of like the friendship forming where they're sitting inside the spaceship and it's all made out of like pegboard. Like you could hang up tools. What do they call that where it's got all the little holes? Is it a pegboard?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a workshop, a workbench. And they're talking about the differences between the species and how it's basically, we were made the same. They say, we have a habit of eating outside if the weather is pleasant.
How wild.
I do want to, they talk about having cherry wine, and I want to try that. That sounds pretty good. We call it Limbuba. And that's the Lost Skeleton of Cadavra.
There's a little bit of like in this movie of them just saying, "Oh, it's alien blank." There's not too much of it. They don't do that kind of joke too much. But I was trying to remember there was something we watched, Brian, where everything was the prefix of whatever the monster type was. What am I thinking of?
I think it was the time blank in Gravity Falls.
Oh, yes, that's what it is. I think that is what it is.
A time wish. Win the time battle and you get a time wish.
That's probably it.
Have you watched Gravity Falls, Lindsay?
A little bit here and there.
Okay. Really, really like Gravity Falls. It seems like a show tailor-made for me. We did an episode on it back as episode 50.
Cool. Maybe I'll add it to the queue with my not physical media.
Well, it's good that it's very accessible on streaming. You can watch it on Disney Plus. Of course, you won't hear it with Louis C.K.'s voice. It's been redubbed.
Mm. Who was he in it?
Small role in the finale. Somebody who has a more prominent role and has not been dubbed over is Justin Roiland.
Who does he play?
He plays the time traveler who talks about all the time stuff.
Oh.
It's basically...
The triangle guy?
No.
I don't think I made it past, like, the triangle guy.
The triangle guy is voiced by the creator of the show, who ended up being the same one who dubbed over Louis C.K.
I was going to ask you, Brian, something in common between both of these films is that the director has a role. Is that something that you've considered?
I would definitely be down for that. I think what I would want to do is I have a scene that's set in a tiki bar, and I kind of want to be like a lounge singer in the tiki bar.
Can you sing?
Kind of.
He can sing.
Yes.
Can you sing well?
I'll send you some clips and you could tell me what you think.
Oh my God.
It doesn't have to be that. If it's so torturous, it doesn't have to happen that way. I could also be a crew member on the ship.
I've never heard of a lounge singer in a tiki bar.
That's a very good point.
My tiki bar would have lounge singers.
You could be like Vincent. Is it Vincent Price in the first Beach Party movie?
Which I just rewatched that as well this week.
Oh, you did?
I did, to get that spirit. Because, like I said, my advisor wants me to overhaul the script. So it's like, I want to make sure that the energy is still there, even with whatever changes I make. And his key note, because I met with him again today, was make clear what you want to say about the material. Like, what is the author's feeling about this material? And so that's kind of what we've gathered here today to talk about. Why this? Why is it this that calls to me? And I still have to noodle on it some, but I think it's just that it got into me early. Like, this is the kind of stuff I was watching when I was 7. Not these two movies specifically, but we've talked in the past that, like with Plan 9 from Outer Space, this was being broadcast on Friday nights on a PBS station out of Northern Virginia Community College. And I would catch it, and I would watch it, and I would think, like, this is what it means to be grown up. It's like, this is adult cinema. This is real film. It's not kids' movies. It's this stuff. And so maybe that's why it has an outsized importance in my life. But it's like, it has a charm to me.
That's interesting that you watched it, like, because the whole thing with camp is like, it's failed seriousness, but a child watching it, like, wouldn't interpret it that way, I guess.
That's right. We've said in the past that things like Plan 9, things like Pee-wee's Playhouse, I just took it at face value when I was very young of, okay, this is legitimate theater. This is normal television fare. When really it's pretty out there.
I wonder if also, Brian, you empathized with the aliens. You're like, I get that they don't get what's going on in the grown-up human world, because I also don't get what's going on in the grown-up human world.
There's something to that. Or what did Criswell say in Plan 9? You may meet someone in the street, and you will never know it, but they will be from outer space. But there's certainly something here. I also appreciate that people could go out there with limited resources and make these visions. Like, you think of space movies being particularly expensive, probably, because you got to create all these elements that are otherworldly. But here, people were doing it with shoestrings.
In some cases, literally, in the skeleton.
Yeah. It's like, it doesn't really need to be anything more necessarily than a theatrical backdrop. Like, if you could do it as a stage production, why not? Why can't you do it as a movie? But I appreciate you both coming tonight to consume these films with me. Are there things that you took from them?
Consume? This is like a little aggressive. Things that I took from them. Lindsay, you can go first on that one.
I guess it's that, like, yeah, kind of like Dan was saying earlier, how it's warm-hearted. I think both of them are. They're passionate. They might be considered a failure by some, but a success by others. And I think, like, camp in general is just, like, happy, and it's like, why hate? Why be a hater? Like, finding what's good in something and the whole drawing attention to the artifice of it all is really interesting to me.
Yeah, and then I would say I found Teenagers from Outer Space in particular to be kind of like anthropologically fascinating. Like, I was just more wondering, like, why did they envision aliens as just humans? What does that tell us about people in the 50s? Is it just that they lacked imagination and they hadn't been exposed to media where you could have creatures that just you can't even envision? Was it that they lacked production values, or does this say something about how they were viewing this existential threat of this new technology in the Cold War? And you never know what this there could be a commie down the street. Is it stuff like that happening under the hood in American values?
Right. I think they're definitely trying for some social commentary in Teenagers from Outer Space, where they've got the none too subtle anti-totalitarianism.
Mm-hmm.
Anti-violence too.
Right. Yeah.
And that like, all life has value. The whole speech about the dog from Derek.
So on our Discord, listeners, I'm also going to be linking the proof of concept short we shot last semester, which borrows pretty heavily from Teenagers from Outer Space.
And I watched it and enjoyed it.
We've got an alien protagonist who bonds with the humans, who is not on board with the violent approach.
And I think for the second one we watched, the Lost Skeleton or whatever it's called, I always like seeing an homage that does a good job of like actually loving the material, but also making fun of it. I think it's easier to be mean-spirited toward the material. My favorite movie of all time, That Thing You Do, is a little bit like that on a biopic we talked about, Brian. It's not like a parody in the same tone. It's more just like a lighthearted version of it. But I don't know, just something about like simultaneously doing it, but also like knowing that it's a little silly, but also like still kind of respecting that silliness. I always get, and there's a bunch of other examples. Like I mentioned Black Dynamite. You can go through lots of genres and like find examples of them doing it right. This winter, there's a couple I've heard of for like the Hallmark type Christmas movies, so I might find one of those to watch, although I suspect those will be a little bit more cynical in their parody, so we'll see.
Well, sometimes I like cynical parodies too.
I know you're a Walk Hard guy, so
Walk Hard's one of my favorites. So Lindsey, are there things that were in these movies that we should strive to capture that we've not touched on yet, that we've not drawn in?
I noticed as far as cinematography, definitely like the master shot, the wide master shot as a cutting back to, but then mixing that in with like the dynamic subjective point of view and random. I really liked in the Lost Skeleton, the like handheld zoom in on the face screaming situation. I do think we should incorporate more danger somehow, more peril. Like I said earlier, someone could turn into a skeleton or get boiled like a lobster.
Well said.
At any time. And then lastly, I think you need to think about how much you want to lean into the like campy characters, because people who are telling you that you need more character development, it's like, do you want that or do you want something stylized? And like, what's the balance? Or like, are some characters this and some are this? But I think that's up to you as the director.
Yes. So we have a bunch of paperwork due on next Thursday. And it's a draft. Like the final project of the course is more detailed paperwork, but still, over the next couple of days, I'm going to be doing some deep thinking. But we want it to be fun. That's the big thing. Keep it fun. The last time we did it, it was fun. It'll probably still be fun. It'll be colorful. I don't think I want to do black and white.
I did read that I think the Lost Skeleton, they shot it on video and then printed on film.
Oh, wow.
Which Color Lab offers.
That could be cool. But I will be fundraising soon. Maybe by the time this episode goes up, I'll have a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo or something. What was the thing we learned about last week?
Seed and Spark.
Seed and Spark. Maybe one of those. But I'll hit you in the Discord and rattle my tin cup for you.
And we'll be there.
Thank you guys for having me on.
We do have one more segment, Lindsey.
Oh, you do? Okay. Oh, is it good?
That's right. Is It Good is our signature section where we each give the movie a rating on our 8-point goodness scale, ranging from very not good, which is a 1 out of 8, to our masterpiece rating, toward a good, an 8 out of 8. So, Lindsey, I don't know if you've ever listened to an episode of our show or if you got a chance to read through it. You could also think of it as like the Roger Ebert 4-star scale, if that's helpful. I can go first. We'll do Teenagers from Outer Space from, 1956, 1959, 1959 first. Is Teenagers from Outer Space from 1959 good? So I'm a little ambivalent on this one, a little mixed. It's in some ways like the prototypical 50s cheesy sci-fi movie. And then on the other hand, I didn't find it to have quite as much character as Plan 9 or Manos. The Room is like a totally different, quote unquote, so bad it's good.
How do you rank that? Because I feel like there'd be 2 rating systems for is it good actually, or is it good, or is it so bad that it's this good?
Well, you're in luck because Dan has some thoughts on this.
Thank you for asking that. That's a very good question. And I have opinions on this matter. So my opinion is that once it becomes so bad it's good, I don't even like that phrase, so bad it's good. To me, if it's so bad it's good, forget the so bad. It's just good then. Because it's achieved success on a metric that is maybe different from what it was striving for. In fact, almost certainly different from what it was striving for. But it has morphed into good in some other way, perhaps even more interesting as art, because it's like making us think about our priors and how we engage with the medium and what that medium tells us about how we consume stories and like what we expect stories to do. And maybe it's just a comedy that's funny, but wasn't trying to be funny. And, so it's not doing what it set out to do. I guess you called that camp. I don't know if that's universally what you would call camp, but to me, if it's quote unquote so bad it's good, that's why I always put scare quotes around it when I say that, because to me, then it's just a good movie. It's just operating in maybe not the way the makers wanted it to, or outside of conventional quality. But I feel like we're not 100% consistent on addressing that. Sometimes I'll say this made me laugh a lot, but it's bad, and I'll give it a bad rating. But then I'm really not being internally consistent with that. Brian is sometimes, I never know when he's going to come in and just drop a hardcore 1 out of 8, or he'll be like, oh, you know what, this is actually kind of good, and give it a 5. So we'll see where he lands on with this. I really don't know.
Yeah, I've been all over the place. Sometimes I try to be objective and hit it with the 1 or the 2, but sometimes it's like, you know what, I had a good time with this one, 5. I think I gave Plan 9 from Outer Space a 5.
Yeah, you gave Plan 9 a 5. I think I gave it a 4, but then you gave The Room a 1, and I gave it a 5. So
I thought you liked The Room, Brian.
Well, it's like, in that case, yeah, I don't go necessarily by the same scale that Dan does. It's so unusual because you've got the writer and director is the totally inept one, but he had so much money to throw at it that a lot of the people involved were competent. So it's this bizarre hodgepodge where it's got good cinematography and an original score, and then this is what the people are doing and saying.
But how is that different from Plan 9, where is it just because it was made for cheaper?
I guess so.
Or is it just that it's got aliens? Is that the difference?
You got me. I got a soft spot for aliens. We get multiple bonus points if you got aliens in your movie.
So maybe not expecting a 1 on this one tonight. We'll see. I'm going to give Teenagers from Outer Space a 3 out of 8, a not good. tending towards 4, almost a 4. I just didn't enjoy it quite as much as I enjoyed Plan 9, which I gave a 4. I got a little bored. It's just like stuff happens and then stuff happens and stuff happens. And I'm like, I kind of get that this is like interesting and quirky in that sort of 50s sort of way, but I just kind of got tired of it. So, but I still think it is kind of maybe not essential viewing, but like a quintessential version of this kind of movie. So if you like the cheesy 50s movies, if that draws to you, if that appeals to you, then you got something to watch here in Teenagers from Outer Space. Brian, what about you?
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty similar. I'm actually going to give this one a high 4, just on the verge of a 5. We call that good-ish, because I do find it charming. I like that one person was so involved in bringing this thing to fruition. Writer, director, supporting character, and I don't know, editor, who knows what else, but was able to win these other people over to being involved in the vision. And yeah, has this message about, actually, I was like describing the plot to my advisor today, and he said, well, to me, it sounds like the theme is humanity is worth fighting for. And you know what? I guess that's what it is. I think if it can be something as simple as that, then I don't think we're going to have trouble making our movie.
What's the theme of zombies, Brian? What isn't the theme of zombies, actually? Let me ask you that.
Actually, Dan, listening as much as I have to the soundtracks of the Zombie trilogy, by the way, listeners, Zombies 4 is coming soon, so expect that we're going to get a new episode on that one. But like, if you listen to the first song of the first movie, which is My Year, and then to the last song of the last movie, which is Nothing But Love, it really is like a cohesive arc, and the message is everyone is welcome. Bring in everybody, disrupt the heteronormative structure of society, bring in everybody possible, whether they're like poor zombies or indigenous werewolves or immigrant aliens. It's like, bring in everybody. And I think that's the message of the Zombies franchise. What do they say in Nothing But Love? They say, we're ready for it. Give us more. It's where this all began. It's like not just zombies, but also werewolves and vampires plus. Like lagoon creatures and blobs and mummies and everything.
There you have it. That's zombies. And maybe we'll see that in Brian's film as well. I don't know.
Maybe so.
Remains to be seen. I'll be curious what the theme of that one is too. I should say Brian and Lindsey's film. So Lindsey, is Teenagers from Outer Space good? What would you give it on our scale?
I think I'm going to give it a 4, good-ish, because I enjoyed it. I had a few laughs. I also had some boredom, but yeah, I was impressed that it was such a small budget and everything. But I kind of wish they went a little bit further and had like more of the effects and stuff like that. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I liked it, didn't love it. But I definitely see what's cool about it.
I think that's a really good point that I didn't really think about. Maybe that was why I was bored. But like, they don't do too much with the effects. It's like the one effect is somebody gets vaporized. They do that one about 55 times. And then they have the lobster kaijuing in there. But
and like the drill.
That's true. They do have yeah.
But I was hoping to see more. I was hoping to see more miniatures, but I liked it.
Yeah. That would be good. There's not as much variety as Plan 9 from Outer Space. When Dan was talking about Plan 9 from Outer Space, he said, there's always some new idiocy. Some incompetent trick. And we didn't quite get that with Teenagers from Outer Space. So it ranks a little lower than Plan 9, but still fun. And just the way that it came into my life as a surprise bonus feature on a video game.
That is pretty great.
Makes it memorable.
Yeah, yeah. On to the Lost Skeleton of Cadavra from, we think, 2001 by Larry Blameyer. I had more fun watching this than I did Teenagers from Outer Space. I can see your thesis on this one, that anything that's just being this silly intentionally, it doesn't have quite the same inherent charm in it. But I laughed a lot, and I was engaged. I enjoyed it. I do think it wears out its welcome a little bit in the second half. I was kind of ready for it to be done because I kind of knew what joke it was gonna make. But then it would have still surprised me with some of the jokes. Some of the jokes still made me laugh. You could never go more than like a few minutes without a pretty hearty laugh on this one. So that's enough to get it over the line to good. And actually, this is right up near a very good, a 6 out of 8, but it's not quite there for me. It's a high-end good 5 out of 8 for me. And I would sleep on it and maybe be amenable to a very good especially if I got a chance to watch it again in like a proper funny movie watching atmosphere with a group and kind of a casual hangout atmosphere. I feel like this could do numbers. So I'm going to say that The Lost Skeleton of Cadavra is good. Brian, what about you?
I really like this one. It's worn down some with rewatches because the gags are really repetitive. I put this in my top 10 movies when we did our top 100 series a while back. I think it's been a little too inflated. I don't think it quite would warrant that spot if we did the list again today. I think it's going to edge just slightly over to the notch into the 7. Exceptionally good. Because it just does feel to me like a pretty singular achievement in, okay, we're going to go and we're going to make a 50s alien invasion film, but we're going to do it in the 2000s. And I just like the auteur vibe that Larry Blameyer has. I hope he gets to do more. He's done like 6 features, but they were all like in the 2000s. And they're all various genre tributes. They did a sequel to this called The Lost Skeleton Returns Again. And then he was going to do a third one called The Lost Skeleton Walks Among Us. But he did a Kickstarter and it didn't get anywhere near too successful. So as far as I know, that was abandoned, and now he like writes comic books.
That's too bad. Gotta support our independent filmmakers out there.
We gotta bring them back.
And I like that the thing that it's making fun of is, or homaging, doing in its own form, is like not the number one thing out there. It's not like the most obvious thing that you would. It's not the most obscure. Like I think everybody knows that there's these kinds of Z movies from the 50s. They get parodied in a lot of stuff, but like it's also not the most obvious target, and it's clearly done with someone who understands them and not just going for like the cheap, I kind of know the vibe and I'm just making things bad on purpose. Like there's love and appreciation of the originals in there.
Yeah, it's like a lost instance of the form.
Mm-hmm. And then Lindsay, what about you? Is this one good? What would you give it?
I think before we had our discussion, I might have rated it lower than I am gonna rate it. I agree, Dan, that it definitely, like, the environment in which you watch it would influence your enjoyment. I think perhaps a drink or other substance might also enhance enjoyment of this film. I'm gonna give it a good, maybe a low good. I did laugh. Toward the end, I was getting tired of it, but it was solid. It was, like you said, an instance of the form, warm-hearted. Yeah, I laughed.
Also, never be afraid to tear something down, because there have been it doesn't happen a lot, but there have been a couple instances where we end up really far apart. Usually we're pretty similar in our ratings, but not always.
Well, yeah, I mean, I love camp, like, as an art form and celebrating it. So I think that's trending my rating higher because I just like the idea of it. And there were a lot of funny parts, but I do think it got a little bit old.
Yeah. And like Dan said, it seems like this would have been fun to be on this set. Like they had a good time doing what they were doing.
For sure.
Well, thank you both for joining and for watching not one film, but two. Thank you, Lindsey, for joining us. I hope it was fun.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I feel like I understand a new part of you, I guess, or understand it more.
That's what we try to do here is, we may not have the biggest viewership or listenership, but it's like, can I learn something about Dan? Can Dan learn something about me? Can the 5 people on our Discord overhear?
Mission accomplished, if so. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. It's always good to have fresh voices on here and new perspectives. So we really appreciate you joining us, and I'm looking forward to y'all's project. What's it called again?
The Lobsters at Beach Party Point.
Exclamation point.
So, Dan, what lies ahead of us?
So keen listeners will remember last year, I assigned Brian the craft. And I was like, I think there's a reason I assigned this, but I can't remember why I did. And then I realized I thought it was The Faculty. The Faculty is a Robert Rodriguez movie, and it was written by Kevin Williamson. And it's right in that they're both movies that are like right around Scream and are kind of Scream adjacent.
I'm obsessed with Scream. And
we talked about, did we talk about all 6 Screams on this pod, Brian? At least 5 of them.
Just the first 5.
Just the first 5.
Well, maybe we'll hit you with Scream 6 and 7 when we finally get Zombies 4.
Maybe. Scream 7 coming out soon. I heard that. I was just reading about it. But I'm gonna actually get the right movie this time, the one that I was thinking of. And we had a good conversation on The Craft. I was glad we watched it. But now we're actually gonna watch The Faculty. And there was a connection. What was the connection? Oh, we talked about Spy Kids earlier. Like we were talking about Floop.
Speaking of camp.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And we also talked about what if David Lynch made this movie. And quite honestly, Brian, I almost said I think there's a little more to it to that because the first 2/3 of Mulholland Drive do operate in this sphere where there's like an intense artificiality about it. But the reason I bring that up is because another one that I know what I'm doing for my next spooky movie pick. I might at some point before the end of the year do Eraserhead. So we have all of the cult 1977 horror films because we talked House, we talked Suspiria, but we haven't talked Eraserhead yet. So maybe at some point.
Wait, House? Do you mean the one with like the Japanese one?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Ah, that movie's crazy.
I love that movie so much. It's so wild.
That was one of our very first episodes. That was pretty early.
Yeah, it was pretty early. But The Faculty, Brian, 1998, Robert Rodriguez.
Cool. I'm looking forward to it. One of my picks later in the month is also going to be kind of picking up pieces from something like a thread from earlier on.
Okay, cool. All
right. Well, join us again, listeners, for a listening experience that's out of this world.